The hook is so important because it grabs your reader's attention. Now, of course, then you got to get some background information in there. And let's not forget about the claim, right? We got to end with the claim. I'm going to pause myself. Do you guys know what I'm talking about right now? And actually, let's do a check-in here. Let's do a stop and jot. I want you to pause the video and jot down in your social studies notebook if you know what I'm talking about right now. Just yes or no. And if you do know what I'm talking about and you say yes, I want you to actually put down what it is I'm talking about right now. Okay, go ahead and do that. Okay, I'm going to assume you've done that. And what I'm talking about here is introductions. But more importantly, I'm trying to illustrate why introductions are so important by not actually using an introduction for this lesson, right? Normally in a lesson, I'm going to try to engage your attention, but then I'm going to go ahead and tell you what the focus of the lesson is and give you some background information and really set things up before I get into the nitty-gritty details, right? I didn't do that for this lesson. I just dove right in. And my guess is it felt very abrupt and it was probably confusing for some of you. And that's the same way in an essay. In an essay, if you just dive right in, it's going to come across abrupt and it might confuse people. So introductions are a really important way to set things up, right? And as you can see, it's not even just for writing essays. If you're teaching a lesson, you need to know how to do an introduction, how to set things up. It applies to if you are coaching or if you're making a YouTube video or you have to deliver a presentation or you're training an employee. I mean, there's so many different ways that knowing just how to introduce things is useful. That this is a skill that's applied more than just for writing an essay for school. Okay, so that's our topic today, that and conclusions. Okay, that's our big focus for the last day of our Civil War essay. Okay, and before I go into much more detail about intros and conclusions, let's just have a check-in as to where we're supposed to be in the essay process so far. Now, you were supposed to have had your graphic organizer done by the end of the day on Thursday, so this should be totally completed. And then in terms of writing the essay, you should have this much done. Okay, so Friday we talked about, put your name down, class down, my name, put the title down. I mentioned that it's not a bad idea to put your claim down for your intro and then just put a note to yourself to finish the rest. But really the biggest focus was doing these 3 body paragraphs. I'm gonna highlight these real quick. So you should have a completed version of your 2 evidence and reasoning paragraphs and your counter argument and rebuttal paragraph. And then again, not a bad idea to put a little note to yourself to remember to do your conclusion. Okay. So if you are caught up and you are on pace and that you've done all that, then the good news is you're super close. Okay. All you have to do today is you have to finish up your intro and then you got to do your conclusion. And then make sure to go through and read your essay through 1 or 2 more times to revise and edit. Okay. All right. So let's go to some vocab and learn more specifically what we're looking for with our introduction and conclusion. So it says here, the first paragraph in your essay is your introduction. Okay, you always start with an introduction, and the job of the introduction is to set up the essay. It includes a hook, background information, and your claim. All right, that's what I'm going to go over in more detail pretty soon. And then you end your essay. Your last paragraph of your essay is where you put your conclusion, and it wraps your essay up. Okay, it includes a summary and a wrap up. I also put a note here so that's clear then that like your actual evidence, again, like the nitty gritty, which is what I'm calling your like evidence, your reasoning, the counter argument, that stuff, the meat of your essay doesn't go in your intro or your conclusion. That's all the body. And then your intro is a paragraph at the beginning to set everything up. And then your conclusion is another paragraph at the end to summarize and wrap it up. Okay. So let's actually keep scrolling down and let's talk a little bit more in detail about what those aspects of the introduction look like. So first of all, we start with the hook, right? The job of the hook is to grab your reader's attention in a way that is related to your topic, right? So yes, you have to find a way to grab their attention, but also you have to make sure that it's relevant. You can't just start with some fact you found about how many people survive when they're lost at sea if you're writing a paper on the Civil War, right? yeah, you might grab their attention, but it's not going to be helpful to them because then you're going to immediately switch gears to the Civil War and they're going to be confused and yada, yada, yada. Okay. And there are common techniques people use to hook their readers' attention. Okay. You could start with a question. If you do this one, make it actually an interesting question. Okay. I think the only hard part about this one is that there's a lot of kind of, to be honest, lazy questions you could ask that don't show a lot of creativity or thought. And it's not really going to hook your readers. Like if you're just like, have you ever heard of the Battle of Gettysburg, right? Or do you know much about Civil War? That's not something that really engages people. You'd have to actually ask like a really creative, compelling question that might legitimately get your readers thinking. But that's an option if you can do it well. You might start with a famous quote if it's relevant to your topic. You might start with a fact if that fact is relevant to your topic, or just a startling statement that's related to your topic that can jar your readers. You might even start with an anecdote, which is kind of like a little hypothetical scenario or story. Okay. Yeah, I'll model that more later, but I'm going to leave it at that. Actually, I'm going to model it right now. So let's go to my essay here. So I have to finish my introduction, which means I need to add my hook and background. I already have my claim, so I'm good there. So let's see for a hook. What do I want to do for hook? I'm going to go back to my notes. And by the way, I'm going to put these, attach these notes in Google Classroom. So you can review this again if you need to as you write your essay. So I think what I like to do when I write is I like to think about what is most unique and important and compelling about my topic, and then decide if I want to get that idea across through a question or a quote or an anecdote or something else. And to me, I think the idea of the Siege of Petersburg and how it prevented the Confederates from having their supplies was just like a really powerful and compelling idea. Obviously, I'm not going to explain it in detail, like I would for my evidence. I will do that more in the body of my paragraph, but I might get them thinking about that idea, okay? And I'm going to go ahead and do that with an anecdote, hypothetical scenario, because I think it might be interesting to make my readers have to consider what would it be like to fight without weapons, right? Because that's essentially what the Union's trying to do at Petersburg, is they're trying to cut off their last supply line so that they can no longer send their supplies, which it includes food too. So it's not just weapons, but I'm just going to pick one thing to get their brains thinking. It's going to make it really hard for the Confederates to keep fighting if they can't keep getting new weapons, new ammunition and stuff to their soldiers. So I'm going to do a little like hypothetical scenario. I'm going to say, imagine fighting a war without weapons while the other side shoots at you with guns and cannons. You would have to try to get close enough to slap them with your hands. So I'm trying to show the ridiculousness of it. Now, obviously, the Confederates were not ever going to actually fight a war trying to go and slap people, because they would just have to surrender if they didn't have weapons. But that's the point I'm trying to make, is basically like, if you could really prevent your opponent from getting new weapons, they have to surrender, because the only other option is something silly like that. Okay, so anyway, so that's kind of my hook. I'm just trying to draw their attention. Imagine fighting a war without weapons. While the other side shoots you with guns and cannons, you would have to try to get close enough to slap them with your hands. Now I have to kind of bridge the gap between that little opening anecdote to my topic itself, and that's where the background information comes in. So I'm going to say, this is essentially what the Union did to the Confederates at let's say during the Siege of Petersburg. My gosh. I'm not going to go into any more detail about it, because again, that's evidence that I'm going to use in the body. I'm just trying to get their brains thinking, okay? So I'm going to leave that there, but I'm going to give a little more background information so they know even what I'm talking about, what the context is for this battle. So I'm going to say, before the battle, we can also call it a battle. Before the Battle of Petersburg, the Union had been winning more battles, but hadn't, let's say, hadn't made the Confederates desperate enough to surrender. I can say, now this is my claim, but I'm gonna change the wording a little bit so everything flows. However, the siege of Petersburg was the turning point for the Union in the Civil War. Okay, let me read that through one more time. Imagine fighting a war without weapons. While the other side shoots at you with guns and cannons, you would have to try to get close enough to slap them with your hands. This is essentially what the Union did to the Confederates during the siege of Petersburg. Before the Battle of Petersburg, the Union had been winning more battles, but hadn't made the Confederates desperate enough to surrender. However, the siege of Petersburg was the turning point for the Union in the Civil War. I like that. So real quick, I'm just going to highlight my hook so you can see that how I kind of did each part. My hook I'll just put in red. I guess I'm not highlighting it. I meant to highlight it. Rather, I guess I'm changing the color of the writing. I will put yellow. Is yellow? No, let's do green. That'll be easier to see. My background information is in green. And then I've got my claim here. I'll put in blue at the end. Okay. Grab their attention with one of those techniques. Fill in the background information on what they kind of need to know leading up to your event, and then end with your claim. Okay. And you know, that's how it works. And it's going to take time to keep getting better. Granted, I know you guys have written some essays for RLA and presumably for social studies in the past. So hopefully you have some experience with that. Oh, okay. Sorry, I meant to go over background and claim before I went back and did the entire intro, but that's fine. Hopefully you got the point there. The hook is the hardest part, you know, and so that was the thing I wanted you to see the most, was the way I thought through how to write my hook. The background information, as you saw, just kind of gave context. And then the claim, you guys have already written and presumably put in your essay, so I don't really need to talk anymore about that. So let's talk about the conclusion, and then I'll sign off so you guys can actually get working. The conclusion has two parts, so it's a little shorter. You're going to start just by summarizing the main points of your essay. Okay, it's good just for your reader to get that reminder again before they stop reading of what you really wanted to say. And then your wrap up is closing up your paper with sort of a final statement. It could be a final thought, a call to action, a question. Honestly, again, you have to start to get a feel for what your essay is like and what your goal is with it. And this is something that takes more creativity, and you have to decide what's the best way to end it. So again, I'm going to go ahead and show you how I'm going to do it. And so I have to do, well, actually, I want you guys to tell me. I forgot I was going to do a stop and actually, no, sorry, I'm going to switch it up. You have to do the summary for the first thing in your conclusion. I'll tell you that. I want to see you guys try to do a summary for my essay. Okay, so I'm going to try to give you a quick recap, and I want to see you kind of try to write it in a sentence or two like it was your conclusion. So remember that I'm trying to prove that the siege of Petersburg was the turning point for the Union in the Civil War. And then I showed how this event was a turning point because it cut off the Confederate supply line, and which made it very difficult for them to keep fighting. And then my second paragraph, I went into detail about how it also helped the Union capture the capital, Richmond, which is super important to the Confederacy. Okay, so those are the two big pieces of evidence. And usually you don't sum up the counter argument point in your conclusion, so I'm not going to recap that part. So if you were writing my essay and you had to write the conclusion and you were going to write the summary, just to sum up what my main points are, I want you to just try to do that for the stop and jot. Okay, pause the video and jot down how you would summarize my main points as if it was your conclusion. Go and do that now. Okay, so I'll go ahead and do how I would write it. So you always start with some kind of transition, like with everything. Get used to that, guys. Transitions are huge. You could say in conclusion, or in sum, or in summary, or to sum it up. I'm going to say to sum it up. I don't know. I just kind of, that's what I'm feeling right now. So I'm going to say to sum it up, the Siege of Petersburg, let's say, gave the Union the momentum it needed to win the Civil War. That's the main point overall I'm trying to make. How did I prove it? I said it did this by cutting off the Confederates' supplies and by leading to the capture of Confederate capital, Richmond. Let's say after this, the Confederates, I keep saying the Confederates a lot, the Confederates had no chance of winning the war. So that's really just a summary. I haven't done my final wrap-up statement, but that's a pretty good summary of my main points. Now I just need this final statement. So again, let me just go back to my notes. A final thought, a call to action, a question. Well, I don't need to do a call to action because that's more if I'm like, if I did an essay on like, why should you recycle, or, you know, why is bullying bad? That would make sense for me to call my readers to action and do something. I'm more just teaching them about history in this lesson, so I would earn this essay, so that doesn't fit. So a thought or a question could work. I think I'm going to go with like just a final thought, just to drive it all home. And I'm going to come back to that idea of cutting off supplies because that was what I started with. So it's kind of a nice thing to end with it. So I'm going to say, you know, I'm going to play on kind of like a common phrase. If you've never heard the phrase, if you can't beat them, join them. I'm going to try to do something clever with that. We'll see if it works. So I'm going to say, it's been said that if you can't beat them, join them. I say, if you can't beat them, cut off their supply line. So just kind of a final statement that tries to be sort of clever, kind of tries to make the ending memorable, and more importantly than anything, just like drives that main point home again, which is just that supply line thing that I started with in my intro. So my summary, I will do in blue, and then my wrap up in red. Okay. And then all I would need to do is I just need to go through and read my essay and check for typos, check for uncapitalized I's, see if if it flows well. Do I need to add transitional phrases? Maybe I might need to add a little bit more explanation to one of my reasonings. Just make it good, right? Make it solid. And then I'm done. And then all you have to do is attach this to today's assignment and click submit. And you're good to go at that point. Okay. So I hope I put, I forgot to write down here what the to-do steps are for today, unfortunately. So I will tell them to you. Number 1, write your introduction. Number 2, write your conclusion. Number 3, revise and edit your essay. And number 4, attach it to today's assignment and submit it. And then you're good. And then the essay is done. And then we'll do one last day probably on the Civil War just to tie everything together, and we'll move on to our next unit. All right, that's all I've got. As usual, if you have questions at any point, send me a message on Google Classroom. Have a great day.